Credit union, happy family. I love Lois's takeaway there at the end, and be kind and be bold. And I was also thinking about, as some of us head out to hike the hill, about climbing a mountain. And it's so easy for us to be sitting back in this comfortable hotel thinking, yeah, I could totally do that, right? Or some of you are like, no way, I could never do that. The perseverance that it takes to not only climb a mountain, but serve our members is admirable. We're going to move to our next panel, and I'll start bringing up our next panelists. As we rang in 2023, the world became aware of how vulnerable legacy systems are within our everyday environment. Whether it was meltdowns at Southwest or struggles with the FAA or even hacks and frauds that are occurring, it's showing us that we must know where those weaknesses are and how we can anticipate what it will take to control our credit union's destiny. We have a pretty star-studded panel coming up to join us. First, I'd like to welcome Shazia Manis. She is the SVP of Experience Capabilities at CUNA Mutual Group. She's a fierce credit union advocate, a brilliant futurist, and a longtime underground thought leader. Thank you, Shazia. We have George Estrada. We'll bring everybody up, and then we'll give a roaring round of applause. George Estrada, Principal Strategist at Credit Union Amazon Web Services. George and Amazon are new to the underground, but not new to credit unions. And he's here to give us a big picture of what's happening from the cloud. Amber Harson, she's the president and CEO of Prodigy. Amber's an underground partner and industry leader who advocates for modernized core systems on the cloud. We have Keith Soltemeyer. He is the president and CEO of Connecta and one of the best at execution, innovation, and industry leadership, looking for voluntary service. He spreads across the industry. And finally, we have Steve Bohannon, co-founder and chief product and sales officer at Alchemy. Steven brings innovation, has a major impact on the industry, driving purpose through technology. Let's give them a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Brandy. Can you guys hear me? Awesome. So in the course of next 30 minutes or so, we will tackle another uncomfortable topic of vulnerability. Now, very few people in this room, I can assure, feels comfortable confronting their own vulnerability. Starting with myself. And in business, even fewer. And as we rang the bell and welcome 2023, we have seen people, process, system that makes up business is far from perfect. And yet consumers, members, expect seamless experience. They expect perfection. And I don't know how many of you, Brandy mentioned 20 years, I myself included, how many of you have been traveling and flying into DC for GAC for more than 20 years? Raise your hands. And how many of you have lost your luggage? I know, I have a few times as well. Well, we thought losing luggage was a nightmare. Well, Southwest has defined a whole new definition of nightmare, right? Like losing luggage seems like a child's play to us. And not only that, as the meltdown of Southwest system that we all unfolded before our eyes, we also saw multiple other high brand providers' systems not operating the way we want, and consumers' trust was broken right before our eyes. Think about T-Mobile's 37 million victim data breach, or even worse, Caesars Sportsbook crashing of all times during Super Bowl, right? Now, these are the only few big things that we have seen unfolded in the national stage. Just think about every single day how many businesses where systems failures happen that we don't even know about it. Now, the upsell of all of this is it's really a warning flare, reminder, warning for rest of us. So let's not ignore it. Let's not say, thank God it's not us. Let's hope it's not us. Well, hope is not a strategy, right? Let's really, really be mindful and do something about it, assess and activate. And that's what millions of members are entrusting us. Now talk about trust. It is precious. It truly is. And it's a little bit hard to predict. So at this point, from what I know, Google Pay as well as Venmo are trusted by consumers more than even USAA. That's now. But guess what? I don't think either of them should just sit on their laurels and take it for granted. It can change any given time. Now, the reality is, for all U.S. businesses, for the course of last 6 years, we've been a little bit comfy because consumer trust, for greatest trust in U.S. companies, actually has increased 6 points year over year, which is great. Now, what happens when things go well? Inertia settles in. And what it does, it really breeds and leads to what we call like a run, or I call it runway hubris, right? Like how many of you have heard, if it's not broken, let's not fix it, right? Well, you gotta fix it, and most importantly, you gotta modernize it. That's the reality. Now, the truth is, where we really need to be mindful and thoughtful in the fact is understanding how do we go about it, right? Where are the places we make those strategic investments? Where we leave things as it is? And how do we do that in a thoughtful, how do we play those bets? Now, maybe not in Caesar's Sportsbook for granted. So, the panelists, are we ready to tackle the topic of vulnerability? All right, so let's do it. So my thought is, I said the topic, now I said the context. The question to each of you is, what will it take to remain worthwhile for members' trust? And what is the impact and implications on our businesses given the vulnerable technology that we have built in the course of last 60, 70 years? How do we modernize it? How do we move forward? So share your thought, maybe George. Why don't you get going?
Great, thank you, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. George Estrada, I'm the strategist for the credit union team. The credit union team, that's the team that's dedicated to credit unions over at the AWS group. Let me address it with our CTO for AWS has a saying that says, everything fails always, period. All right, so the idea is like start off with the idea that things are going to fail. You know, we tend to look at things through a rear view mirror where we say, okay, you know, you look back and, you know, go with me on this. When you're going down the road and you look at the rear view mirror, it's a very small amount of data that you're getting through that mirror. But when you look forward, there's this wide expanse in front of you. And we look at history in that way. We look at things and we say, oh, you know, the internet disrupted everything. Well, no, not really. The internet started the disruption, but it's all these micro disruptions. Mm-hmm. And so what ends up happening is that everybody waits and says, okay, I'm going to wait for the next big thing. I'm not going to make an investment. And I got my start in technology with USA Today, newspaper industry, late 90s. And you know, at the time, you know, newspapers dominated communication. The classified ads in local newspapers dominated, made a lot of revenue. Gannett, which owned USA Today, had 80 newspapers. Within 15 years, they were almost all gone. And it wasn't the internet. Everybody says it was the internet. No, it wasn't the internet. It was micro disruptions. It was Craigslist, social media, right? Little by little, all these disruptions. The ones that made it through were the ones that knew they had no clue what they were doing, but they knew they needed a presence on the web. And so the point I'm trying to make with this is that as we're looking, it's very hard to predict which disruption is really going to impact you. But one thing is for sure, you need to have a foot in the cloud at this point, right? Maybe not everything in there, but have a foot in there and start experimenting and understanding. And I think it's when you start hedging and you start spreading out your risk that you start really understanding what disruption is, and then you pivot as quick as you can.
How about you, Amber?
Yeah, thanks. Can you guys hear me? No. Thank you. So this has been a really interesting topic for me, coming from the credit union space and then moving over into core technology in the last 10 years. Studying what risks exist for the credit union movement from a technology perspective is a little bit terrifying, just to be honest with you. Just to share a little bit as I researched this, in 2019, the Government Accountability Office did a study on critical technology infrastructure in the United States for several reasons, right? One was to figure out what we were spending $90 billion on a year in IT and infrastructure. And found that 10% of our critical services were outdated by as much as 55 years. 55 years. Do you know a department has 51-year-old technology right now that you guys use every day? The Treasury. They have that rated at a criticality, the highest criticality. So not to totally run a bus over anybody, but I'm pretty confident that's the Federal Reserve's ACH system that they're talking about. It's pretty ancient at this point. And when we think about that, that's not something you guys daily can control, right? Like none of you can stand up and say, hey, US Treasury, what the hell are you doing? Why is this 50-year-old technology helping move my members' money around or transport money for our vulnerable communities? So those types of efforts have to be bigger, and those have to be movement-wide, and we really have to band together and hold partners accountable, and we need to work with our legislation about where that money goes, right? That's the only way we're going to have power in that particular setting. Now, if we move that down to a more microcosm of the credit union movement, and we start to think about the technology partners that are running our operations every day, we have similar problems. The most prominently used core in our movement is written in PL1 software, which was created in the 60s. Yet we line up, we pay 75% more for that core, and we maybe get 50% of the security that we think we're getting, because it's just too old. Now, why do we not change it? There's a lot of reasons why we don't want to change that as credit unions. It's really hard. We're expected as financial institutions to be up 24/7, 365, and there's no interruption to that, ever. What happens as soon as a member can't see their money for 30 seconds? Stephen's experienced this, I'm sure. Digital banking.
Never happens.
Right? Never, ever, ever. They lose it on you, right? And they're blowing up your phones, and they're posting on Facebook, and they're posting on Twitter how terrible you are, and you're not reliable, and all of these things. So it's terrifying, and it's scary. I get it. I get that it's scary. It's like changing out the propellers on your airplane to jet engines while you're flying. Right? But you have to think about doing it. You have to be bold and you have to be brave in considering what your technology stack looks like to mitigate your own risk. You have to get off old cores. You have to be off legacy systems. You have to be ready for what comes next. Don't let... I talked about this at the Underground last time. If anybody was at the last Underground, I talked about I work for a core and I've been in credit union since I was 18 years old. I run my small business on Venmo, because it's easier for me to use, because my credit union doesn't have the systems that it needs in place for me to be able to do that. These are all examples of why legacy software, legacy infrastructure is going to be problematic for the credit unions as we move forward. We haven't even gotten into security yet. We've not even gotten into data breaches and what it means to have systems that are running on architecture that may not be supported or may have known vulnerabilities, but their code base won't work if you upgrade it to a new system, right? And I don't think a lot of us really get to think about that, and our partners won't always tell us that. To be honest, like I don't really want to volunteer that about my own company very often, but we have to also hold our partners accountable to say, what version of things are you on? Is it supported? What does it look like if you have to upgrade? How hard is it to push out code? Where might the breaks be? They do know it will break, inevitably. I think you said that. It's always going to break, right? But there are moves that we can make as an industry to make that better. And I do think we have power to control that destiny more than we think so. There's a lot of QSOs out there that will help you do that. There's a lot of non-QSOs even that are deeply committed to the credit union movement. And I just encourage all of you to find them, put your money where your mouth is, and let's make sure that we protect ourselves from those risks.
Thank you, Amber. How about you, Keith?
All right. Good morning, everyone. So I read some interesting research, I think it was from Gartner, that said increasingly trust is a good digital experience in the eyes of the consumer. And it's one of the reasons when they looked at it across financial services, they said, yeah, credit unions are still pretty highly trusted, but banks are closing the gap fast. The big banks, the ones you thought would never be trusted again after 2008, 2007, and fintechs that came after them. And, you know, the summary that they gave was, well, credit unions have kind of been slower to adopt the digital experience or place the importance on the digital experience, and I get that. So when I look at our institution, I see vulnerabilities essentially in three different categories. The first one, data security. If I remember all three this early in the morning, I'm going to be shocked. Right? So data security, internal tech stack, and then, finally what I call irrelevance. From a data security standpoint, we all have vendors. For the most part, they all have, if they have NPPI, they all have to be SOC 2 certified. So you can get some kind of a comfort level there, but you can't stay passive on that, right? You got to continue pushing. You got to make sure that, that they're staying current. One of the things that really, I think, scares me the most from data security perspective is our weakest links in the chain, which is our members and our employees. So some years ago, probably 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we started phishing our employees. We had our third-party pen tester start phishing our employees, and we do it pretty frequently, I think every month. And when we started, 17 to 19% failed the test. All right, they clicked on the link, and it's chilling. All right, it is chilling. So we set some systems in place where, if you click on the link, you get the benefit of doing an additional 4 hours of data security training. If you click on it the second time, you get the benefit of doing 8. And if you click on it the third time, you might be terminated. Right? So that's kind of how I viewed that. Now, our recent tests, we're down to about 1 or 2%. But guess what? It only takes one. Right? It only takes one. So, I worry about that. I feel like we're doing what we can, but I'd sure like some help if you could.
Well, I can tell you what we did when we started that. Now we stopped it almost immediately. We would do job offers in the phishing emails, so you could find out who was loyal as well as who was insecure.
Yeah.
You get a twofer.
All right. Could someone from my shop write that down? I'm not sure we've done that one yet. So the other thing, our tech stack. And, applications, yes, are you on the current version? Are there data vulnerabilities there? Thank you, Microsoft. There seems to be 30,000 new ones every, month. But one thing that I hadn't thought about until recently was the actual hardware. All right, I learned we had a core failure, hard crash about a month ago. And we went down for 3 hours before we failed over to DR. And 3 hours is about 2 hours and 59 minutes too long, right? And when we found the root cause, turns out, you might know this, but I didn't. I sure as heck didn't know it. So about 5 years ago, because of environmental concerns, the computer manufacturers had to change the solder that they use to attach components to a motherboard. It turns out this solder is not as good as the one that they had prior, but it is environmentally it's environmentally sound, I guess. This solder has a tendency to degrade fairly quickly, right? So if we thought that our core system, which was honestly approaching end of life, it was scheduled to be replaced in June. That solder detached from one of the CPUs. Hard crash down. Oh, wow. All right, so what other little nuggets are we going to have in our tech stack? And we've gotten some vendors now to go in and review all these things. And we also are now going to be religious about sticking to our rotation of replacing dated equipment.
And I would say that's a good argument for the cloud right there.
Well,
I mean,
Very much so.
I know
1,000%.
it's a cheap plug, but I'm just saying.
so there are
I'm with George.
I mean, look, it's. I'm sorry. I was like, you teed me up on that one.
He'll take all
Thank
that
you.
off your hands.
So you do have some vulnerabilities there as well.
Oh, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I think
and,
I think that that's the whole thing around that, around the everything fails, right? It's not that you don't have risks. It's not that you don't have vulnerabilities. You have to start thinking differently, right? You can't think, so you may not need to worry about the hardware, okay? We'll technically be doing the worrying about the hardware. However, we wouldn't expect you to trust us on that data point alone. So you have the flexibility to then architect differently, right? And that's why, again, there's a lot of changes that are coming on. So apologize.
So anytime you concentrate your operations in any point, one point of failure, you run a risk. I don't want to be controversial here. Yeah, I kind of do. But so have cloud providers been 100% reliable 100% of the time? No, they have not, right? And so you can architect, and some cloud providers have multiple instances, so you can spread it across the country. But if you're going to go to the cloud, you better be cloud ready. Because if you think it's cheaper and you go in trying to run your same environment, it is not. It will be very expensive, and you need the expertise on staff to be able to do that. And we have moved some things to the cloud, some applications to the cloud. Email, I hate it. Absolutely hate it. But that's neither here nor there. That's on Microsoft. But I'll move on. The last piece that I would call irrelevance is, again, we all rely on our vendors, on our core vendors, right? The danger there is we've tied ourselves to those vendors, and now our pace of innovation is their pace of innovation, right? Okay, and I know this will be hard to believe, and you can agree to disagree with me on this. Our priorities and their priorities are not always aligned, okay? Now, you can custom develop in-house, and we've done some of that, but there's a danger there, right? So every time you have to upgrade that system, you got to worry about whether you're stepping on your custom code, and you are responsible for that care and feeding. And then you might look back after 5 years of custom development in-house and figure out you got bubble gum and baling wire, all kind of attached to this core provider. And that seamless experience that your members expect is going to be damn hard to deliver. So, I worry about those three things. We do absolutely the best that we know how to do there. And we are always looking for better ways to tackle those three and make sure, again, digital experience largely now equals trust in the consumer. And financial institutions at their core are about trust, right? And, your members have to trust that you're safe and secure and that you're going to be there for them 24/7 and that they're going to have a great, easy experience. And, you don't get a lot of latitude anymore for failure.
Thank you, Keith. How about you, Stephen?
I knew being the last one on this panel, I would have to basically filter out any prepared remarks based upon what, so I don't sound like I'm
You're
parroting
underground.
everybody
What did you
else's.
expect?
So I only have two things to say now. No, I'm just kidding. I think that the topic was the impact or the exposure of this kind of vulnerable tech. So I kind of thought, like, what is the impact? I think Keith hit on it right there, which is trust. I think there's another group, though, that we don't think about. We think about the trust of our members. That's obvious. But really, like, the trust of our employees. You see, whether it be the Southwest thing or, we''ve had a couple within our industry, one major credit union, another major bank up in the Northeast that had some serious digital issues. And these poor employees, the call center employees, the branch staff employees, well, what happens is, do they trust you as their employer whenever, you saw in the Southwest thing, you saw a little bit in the news saying, we knew these systems were antiquated. We've been saying this for a while. They didn't obviously care enough about us to invest in this, right? It can really affect your employer brand, not just your consumer brand. So I think that that's something else when we say we take care of our employees, part of that is investing in the infrastructure so that they don't have to deal with the mess of your lack of planning on these things, right? So I think part of that's putting your money where your mouth is on how much do you really care about your employees, or are you going to put them in a really awkward position because you didn't want to do that, right? So I think that is a really important thing to think about as well, beyond just even just your members. I think the other thing that threatens, obviously, is think about how distracting an event like that is. Think about how distracting that was. Whatever you probably had planned for that month at Connecta probably kind of got put to the back burner. There could have been really important initiatives that you were trying to get done, but you can't because we had this unforeseen, shouldn't be unexpected, but it was unforeseen in terms of the timing of it, the impact of it, and everything else. So it can really put your entire corporate, some serious corporate strategy and goals that you have planned for that year, totally throw it out the window because you got to go now deal with a fire that you didn't expect that you were going to have to deal with. So that's another impact that you can have of having this, of not planning ahead. I would tell you that maybe this will be a little controversial. I think that when I think about, we talk about the illities, we talk about availability, we talk about flexibility, adaptability, all these kinds of things. When you think about the security aspect of things, because data breaches have become so commonplace, I actually think from a brand, you can get away more with that. Now, don't take out and say, Steven said it was okay to have your data hacked. It's not. What I'm saying is there's almost a numbness in the market because of so many people that have been hacked. Oh, okay, there's like a whole playbook that we have now, right? Cybersecurity insurance is based upon it. Okay, you add up the records, you do the credit report monitoring software for a year or whatever. Like there's like a whole playbook for it. I would tell you that probably long-term has less effect on the brand than if you have constant availability issues. People just expect their things to be available. And if you're constantly down, but you're like, hey, but I'm safe. Be like, yeah, but you're not available. Availability, the best way to be secure is to not be available. Even the hackers can't get to you. So I would say that availability and then it kind of goes to security there. Now, one of the things I will tell you, and this is, look, we're big fans of AWS. We're not fans of our bills from AWS, as Keith was talking. It is not cheaper to go to AWS. It is not cheaper to go to the cloud if you do it right. But it is much better. So you think about like even where we were a few years ago, we made the transition, I think 5 years ago. But we were in a private data center basically. It was virtual or whatever, and you had like our primary in Dallas and our secondary in Phoenix. Even though you went through all the DR stuff, let's all be honest. Are we really excited? Like, oh yeah, we're 100% prepared, right? We go through all the tests, we do the audits, we make sure, okay, theoretically, if this happened, we think this would work, right? But we all hope it never does because we all have that bit of doubt in our minds. Well, what the cloud does is basically give you active, real time, all the time, right? So you actually have that flexibility. In fact, it's happening during the day sometimes, where all of a sudden this goes offline and the other one just picks up automatically, obviously with highly available databases and the availability zones that AWS has. It really gives us that kind of level of surety that there is no kind of single point of failure that you're talking about, especially from a physical structure. But the other reason, besides the dependability and availability that gives you, is you really have to think about it even from a security perspective, bringing it back to that. The hackers are using cloud computing centers to try to hack you, right? So if you're fighting them off with your in-house computers and your in-house staff, and I mean that's the type of thing that AWS gives you, is you bring things like Cloudflare to the table and other Elasticache and all these things that allow you ultimately. The bad guys have weapons now that are totally outmatch anyone in this room. I promise you, there's none of you that can keep up with what they do. I'll give you one quick example that just kind of showed. Years ago, it was really easy for us to stop attempting like credential stuffing and things like that. You just, what IP address is it? Cool, shut it down, done, right? Now what happens, we had a fairly large customer of ours that is located in one particular state, and I want to say like 50% of the citizens of that state are customers of this particular credit union. So, and there's one particular area code for that state. So someone had a bright idea that, you know what, we're going to grab every single number associated with this area code. We're going to send out a smishing attack because we know we're going to get at least a 50% hit that this is going to be this particular credit union's member, right? Kind of smart, right? Especially when you do it geographically. They had built on the front of it a totally duplicate site that looked exactly like theirs. they had put in robotic process automation to where as you're entering in your username and your password on their phony site, which looks just like the real one, it's literally real-time entering it into our system behind the scenes. And then when we prompt you for MFA, it's saying, hey, prompt for MFA, you'll be getting a text. And so you literally have a mirror site sitting in front doing this. And then when we look at this traffic and try to shut down, it's coming from 1,000 different IP addresses across the world, right? Because they're leveraging botnets and other things in cloud computing centers to do this. So I'm just telling you, that's the kind of power that you think about that is now out there where people full-time get up in the morning, go to work, and like try to hack you. Don't try to fight that, I would say, on your own. Definitely one of the areas, it's not just AWS, we use AWS, there's Google Cloud, Azure, there's some other options out there, but I would just tell you that part of what you need to look at too is not just, well, if my soldering come loose, what would I do? That's one aspect of it, but it's also is what tools are the people that we're battling, what kind of tools, what kind of hammer do they wield, and am I in a fair fight or not? So another thing I would think about. So I see Brandy's coming in here. I'm going to stop now, Brandy.
Awesome. So first of all, let's not react. Let's respond. Let's assess, because one size may not fit equally for everybody. But more importantly, invest. Invest with the long-term picture in mind with short-term clear milestones. Let's give the panel a big round of applause, and I'm handing over to Brandy. Thank you.